With the United States to the north and South America to the south, right in between, there are a bunch of islands called the Caribbean Islands. Those in the southern part are called the Southern Caribbean Islands. This cruise took us to St. Thomas, St. Bartholomew, St. Lucia, Barbados, the Grenada, Bonaire, and finally Curacao. Our first stop was the island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And right by the dock, a short walk away, were these lizards, these iguanas, whatever they are, right next to the water. And also nearby was the city with these colonial-style houses and buildings. And also there were special vehicles to carry tourists from the tour boats. A group of us decided to go to a nearby island called Water Island. We took this small little ferry boat to the Water Island, which has these lovely coves and lots of boats, with the main island in the distance, as you can see here. We walked a short distance over a little hill to this gorgeous beach where there were boats, ships, yachts moored just outside, and people starting to get ready to enjoy the sun on the beach. Some of the cruise ships had actual tours. They brought people over in catamarans from these cruise ships. You could tell that many of these people were Americans. But also on the beach were some Europeans. But out in the water were gorgeous yachts that had come from all over the world to enjoy this marvelous weather. As we got ready to leave, we went back to the little ferry dock. Other people were arriving in golf carts while we were serenaded by a bunch of locals. This is the library for the island. Then our little ferry departed, taking us back to the mainland, and our ship prepared to depart. Our ship was the Holland America Cruise Line's Maasdam, a gorgeous ship. Our next stop was St. Bartholomew, and here we had to take a tender into land. Unfortunately, the seas were just a little bit rough, and we were way out from the dock, and there were some tense moments as people had to move from the platform on the ship onto the tender to be taken into land. The trip in, we passed by many yachts and other tenders. The trip in was quite safe. Everybody made it. No injuries. Our little group began our walk around the rather small harbor area, passing by gorgeous yachts, and then at the extreme end walked up this long hill to get to a lookout point that was inside a police station barricade. But after calling in, they allowed us to enter and take some pictures down into the harbor area that is used by the pleasure boats, the yachts, and the cruisers. It's a very long, narrow strip with boats moored on both sides. On the way back, we came down the streets and then went over a hill and down to Shell Beach. Now, Shell Beach is a sheltered area, and among other things, it is famous for some women going topless. Many people arrived from the cruise ships to take advantage of this lovely weather. It's a nice beach. Some other people in our cruise did some snorkeling and some photography underwater. These islands are known for their beautiful clear water and therefore great for underwater photography. On the way back, we visited an Episcopal church right near the water's edge. You could see the ships out through the door. Outside, there were these darn locals driving their vehicles around. But it was most fascinating to walk along the dock area, see the various flags from the different countries for the yachts that were moored.
Because the humpbacks go straight up.
And there was this parking area where many people drove down to the harbor. Finally, it was time for us to depart. We got back in our tender, and then as we approached the ship, it didn't look like there was much problem with the sea, but when we got to the ship, it was a real problem getting off the tender, and there were crew members there helping us get off safely. The main feature of this cruise for most of my friends was that it was a jazz cruise, Dixieland jazz, classic jazz. There were 4 or 5 really outstanding bands on the ship performing 2 or 3 times a day. Our next stop was St. Lucia, and this is a bigger town, but there's still people who right out in the middle of nowhere are changing their clothes. One of the central points of interest was a market very close to where the ship docked. You could buy almost anything here, from fruits to tourist items. It's a very large market. This is typical structure there with living quarters above and then below the small stalls where merchants sell their goods. These are taxis lined up to handle the tourists that come off of the cruise ships. Three blocks from the market is the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. And very close by, unfortunately, there are people who aren't so well off. Inside, it was very beautiful. The cathedral was built in 1897, and it has a splendidly painted interior and colorful, detailed biblical scenes. As we got ready to leave, the wind picked up, but on our way, as we worked our way down the shore, we came to the magnificent sights of the pitons. These are two mountains, rocks, hills that stick up beside the water. Gorgeous. As I said, these jazz sea cruises have been going on for about 25 years, and this was to be the very last of the jazz sea cruises, who've always been sponsored by Carol and Bob. So as we were leaving St. Lucia, there was a tribute to their sponsorship.
And the other fine band that was on our cruise was the High Sierra Jazz Band. And that's how it started. And after the first couple of 3 years, I thought there was no way that I was going to be able to continue to do it. I had the dancers on one side and I had the listeners on the other side, and then never the twain shall meet. And we kept looking for ships that had sizable dance floors. We'd find a ship, we'd use it a couple of times, and then they'd reconfigure the ship. I can only thank all of these people up here and all of you for being so supportive over the years. I love you all, and we'll talk later.
Thank you, Carol. Great. Let's enjoy the party.
Our next stop was the Barbados Islands. They are ringed with these gorgeous, beautiful beaches and the azure blue water. We first walked into town, and then it became quite a walk, so we took a cab. There were many colonial structures there, many interesting buildings from the past. And, of course, there were the markets that the locals used. Farther into the city, they have the main modern shops that we all are familiar with. The people there dress with these magnificent colors and often have interesting covers to their heads. A short walk from the very center of town is the Barbados Synagogue. It was built in 1833. We walked back into the center of town and then arranged with a taxi for him to take us on a tour. A little bit unnerving at the beginning to realize you're driving on the left-hand side of the road. There were some very expensive places that the taxi driver showed us. Golf courses nearby, everything that a European-type person would expect to see in a luxury resort area. Often we saw monkeys. Many interesting pieces of architecture, and all the school kids wore uniforms. As I remember, this was advertised as the oldest church on the island. It was a short drive away from downtown Bridgetown. The weather can change quickly. We passed by many agricultural fields. This may be sugarcane. At most ports, just next to the dock, were these enclosed, climate-controlled areas where upscale shops tried to sell items to the tourists coming off the tour boats, and it was necessary to walk through these facilities in order to get to the main island. They had you trapped. Many of the shops were very upscale. At these stops, the crew of the ships worked to maintain the ship's cleanliness on the outside. They not only took care of the hull, but also cleaned the windows, which were not easily accessible from the ship itself. And the weather on board ship wasn't always pleasant. But every day we were entertained with great music. And there were chances for dancing some of the time. Our next stop was Grenada. I had arranged for a tour. There were a number of us in this car.
The most picturesque town in the Caribbean is very colonial, Georgian, Victorian architecture. That's our bus terminus. So we call it City on a Hill, like San Francisco. Narrow streets, hilly town. That's our fish market on our left. If you look inside, maybe you're gonna see these women with those big machetes inside. You don't mess with these women inside it. So you get all the fresh fishes there every day. We have a good fishing industry. We do not deplete the fishing stock. A community at one time, they used to have intermarriages, interbreeding, where a cousin married cousin, and so the people are descendants of Scottish, also Irish. So my dad ancestors was of Scottish descent. My mom, her own, came from the slave, the African side of it. You could look at me like a mulatto, black and white. But the color of our skin doesn't dignify who we are. We are God's children. All schools are all uniform, certainly there's no baggy pants and LA gear. Like every island, every country, every continent, you must have the ugly side, the landfill. Sadly, on this island, like most Caribbean islands, there are no incinerators. We do not recycle. We use so much plastics. We all aware plastics do not break down like that. 2. Beans, after being fermented for 8 days, Monomano are brought to these trays to be dried for approximately 6 days, well, based on the weather. Not only for drying cocoa beans, but they dry cinnamon, cloves, bay leaf, all these things to dry inside.
Got attacked by monkeys.
They didn't really attack. I mean, they came after her because she had a bad foot.
In quality, they cannot beat us, and that is why our biggest buyer is Switzerland. Belgium, Italy, the UK, Japan, some goes to America as well. Who makes the best chocolate? How do you get that quality? The key is our rich, fertile volcanic soil. So this is pure cocoa. You can smell that, and you can smell that, and likewise you can smell it. That's the real deal. Receiving and processing and selling nutmegs. They pay them by cash or by check right off the bat. Then both parties keep a log. At the end of the year, they share part of the profit. It's called a Christmas.
Some of the roads we went on were really narrow. Whoa.
Got some huge ones. This grows space, better for export. Won't be wrong anymore. Sooner or later, you'll see them supermarkets. It'll be square tomatoes and square watermelons. Six months growing, 6 months harvesting.
Cocoa pod. But people seem to be able to pass us. Amazing. At one stop, there were monkeys, beautiful animals, and the various drivers were trying to tempt them with bananas.
Oh, no, one.
He's smarter than you. He's in a monkey. Do they ever make any sounds?
The noise I'm making, as they call it.
Oh my god, they're so
Look at the teeth on those things. Here we come. Here we come. Beautiful. Wow, what a beautiful beast. I'm going back.
that I didn't have one.
As soon as you give them a whole one, they
I was surprised to see waterfalls. Some of the people from our cruise ship went on an intertube trip down a large stream or small river. Lots of rapids. Others from our cruise went and walked around the local markets where the local people were selling things to themselves, not to tourists.
Free.
Very near the ship, there is a fort up on a hill that kind of separates the town. It's called Fort George. And there is a staircase that winds its way up to the fort and then down the other side to the rest of the city. But there's also a tunnel that you can use to get through underneath this hill to get to the rest of the city. There's a one-way street here for cars, so you walk on the right-hand side so the cars can pass on your left, and you also have to dodge other people coming your direction. When you get to the other side, you open up into another harbor where the local merchants are dealing and where the small boats are used to transport materials out to the outlying islands. As we got ready to leave, the sun was starting to set. we were able to look at the lovely city as we left. And the flag came down. Back on board the ship, we were still immersed in Dixieland music. This is the central part of the ship, and one of the venues for the music was just off this spiral staircase.
Nine girls in there on trombone and C-player, Tony Frigg on the cornet, Luke Lewis on the clarinet, Happy Jack Bigger on the banjo, Mike McComb on the drums, Chris Daniels with the Climax Jazz Band.
About the smallest island we visited was Bonaire. It has just a couple of roads on it. We rented a car and drove north along this eastern coast and then stopped at a town, then drove along the western coast back down to the main town. It has a Dutch name and I can't pronounce it. Then we headed west again across the island and tried to visit a place that is known for the sea diving that they do. Then traveled south again along the western coastline, past some windmill farms, and then proceeded up the east side of the south part of the island. Here we passed by the salt flats and the slave huts. Then continued on north and got rid of the car before getting back on the ship. So here we are driving north along the eastern side of the island, very narrow one-way street with the sea to our left. The coast right here is a little bit uninviting. Then there are some inland lakes farther north. Often we saw animals out, and then we visited Rincon. This is overlooking the town of Rincon. It's the second and only the two cities in all of Bonaire. Lizard, very colorful. In Rincon, we stopped at what I would consider to be a 7-Eleven type store, just to mix it up with the locals. More animals along the side of the road. This looks like a land iguana to me. Then we drove out toward this diving area. It's on a dirt road. It had rained recently, but the road was dry. Other animals out along the road, grazing. Don't know who owned them. Don't know whether they were wild. In the near distance, you can see that the light blue water in the bay, the diving area, is free from waves. The car license plates in Bonaire at the bottom say Divers Paradise. Here are some of the divers. They came from around the world to experience the good visibility and the lovely sights underwater here on the shores of Bonaire. There have been divers here for a long time, and they've accumulated just mounds and mounds of shells that they brought up from the bottom of the ocean. Most of these are quite bleached from the sun. They have a small cafe here. Looking out from the cafe, you can see the lagoon, the ocean lagoon, and these piles and piles of shells. There were some shorebirds there that I'd never seen before. Mangroves. Just a lovely area if you're a diver because of the gorgeous water. Got a little bit to eat at this rest stop right beside the diving area. Then continued on. These are those metal windmills that pump the water out of the salt flats. Driving farther south, there's just this oasis next to the ocean. This low-lying area was used to evaporate salt water and generate salt for sale. Slaves lived in these little dungeons to work the fields. This is one of those salt ponds where the water is being evaporated to generate salt. It's inland from the ocean on one of the low-lying areas of the island. Here are some of the salt piles that have been generated as a result of the harvest of the salt. And this is the downtown shopping area. It's a fairly new development and has a lot of the modern conveniences from the mainland on this tiny island of Bonaire. Back on board the ship, more Dixieland music.
To make the theme tune for the movie Blackboard Jungle, you may remember that back in 1956, when this goes back about 60 years earlier. It's a tune called Joe Avery's Peace, but you will recognize it.
Our final port of call was Curacao. It's a very narrow strip of water. The ship parks at one end, and then further on there is this gorgeous, magnificent, huge Audubon bridge up over the river, which is the harbor. Next to the harbor, there are these colorful, beautiful buildings with strange or different architecture lining the water. Very colorful. And then there are the rooftops of this. And one feature of this harbor is that it's narrow, it's a river, and just at the entrance, there is a bridge. It's a pontoon bridge, and it is anchored at one end on a hinge so it can swing in to allow boats to pass. These are the pontoons, and the people use the bridge to cross from one side of the river to the other. But when a big ship comes, then the pontoon bridge swings open and nestles against one side of the land. Here's the bridge swinging open. And now it's starting to get nestled against the land. There's nobody on the bridge now because it's against the land. And this is the track that is used as a hinge for the bridge to bend out of the way to allow the traffic to pass and continue on out to sea. Then the bridge closes again, and once the bridge has closed, then traffic on the bridge, that is to say pedestrian traffic, can resume. There is a whistle, the gates open, and the people surge through the gates to cross over to the other side of the city. The city is divided in two by the river, and this is the only means of easy travel between the two sides. However, when the bridge is open so that people can't cross, then suddenly, miraculously, a people ferry appears, and people use the ferry to get across from one side to the other. I think there are 3 ferry boats that suddenly start working once the bridge opens up for large ship traffic. There's a beautiful, touristy, modern, different area for shopping. It has all kinds of stores you'd want to visit to buy any kind of clothes or jewelry, shoes, whatever you might want. It's a shopper's paradise in this part of the city.
Can I help you? And we say it to a girl, to a boy, but normally it's for a girl. You say, a man say to a girl, Lucia, hey Lucia, you're looking good today.
Everybody gravitates to the internet. This guy's talking to Russia on Skype. And then outside, the tourists are using their smartphones. A pink train for the tourists. And along the waterfront are many outdoor cafes with sun protection overhead and a spray of water to reduce the temperature somewhat. As evening arrives, the sun turns everything a warmer color. The bridge opens up to allow ships to pass again as usual. And then the pontoon bridge closes. But the gorgeous colors in the buildings in this evening light are just amazing. And at night, the activity in these restaurants and in the various shops continues. And we get back on board our ship for our trip home, and The Dixieland music continues as we head home.